And I don't know, I know that like Kelsey and Sarah are on. I don't know if you wanted to say anything also here at the end.
Yeah, no, just appreciate everyone's time today. Really appreciated all the speakers taking time to, highlight their questions and the specific areas where they're, concerned and thinking about. Really looking forward to working with you, Addie and Ryan, on generating the report out of this workshop, and just want to thank everybody for their time. I know I was getting messages all throughout the day saying that this was just a really excellent session that, even folks from the human spaceflight community had tuned into even midway through the day when they heard how it was going. So big success, and just wanted to say thanks to the two of you and everybody for all of your time today.
Yeah, I want to also thank everybody that it has been a really exciting, interesting discussion today. I really appreciate all the input from the community. I also want to point out that we just put out a call for white papers for Artemis Science. I apologize in advance for the deadlines in 2 weeks, but if you have ideas about science that you want to do on Artemis 3, those are open now. You can submit today.
Yeah, that's I did see that email sort of come through during the talks today. It's also the day before the Lester proposals are due. So, hi Ryan, welcome.
Playing music on computers today.
All right, and as I said at the very beginning, but didn't emphasize it all throughout the talks, feel free to turn your cameras on if you'd like to at the end of the day. We won't judge if you have a not water bottle in your hand.
Or coffee on your shirt.
Or coffee on your shirt, or my cat just jumped off my lap, so. So thanks everybody again for all the questions. If there are any final things, feel free to throw them in the chat or the Q&A, and we will still capture them. I guess just to wrap up out of the first session, we had some good questions that were that we didn't answer, so that's, I think, good. But there's a lot of interest from some of the companies that are working on this, of really understanding what the differences are in regolith as a function of where we land on the surface. So especially since there's this, and this sort of ties into the other session, I think, too, but especially since we're going to the South Pole, are there really differences in the regolith properties or in the dust that's there on the surface, and how are we going to need to interact with that? Things like mineralogy, particle sizes, but also the porosity of the material. So we had a good discussion about that. And then also we talked a lot about obviously dust mitigation, and this I think we came a little bit back to this question of mitigation versus keep outs, right? Exclusion, different ways to figure out, do we need passive surface or active surfaces? Heidi Hamill asked a good question of like, if I want to put a telescope on the moon, what do I really need to be concerned about? And that sort of comes into all of these things of understanding the different ways to migrate dust, so during human interactions versus natural environment. And Michael Johansson had a good response about like, well, sort of design your system to be tolerant, right? To be dust tolerant to some degree, and then understand what your limitations are. And there was also finally some questions about dust and spacesuits. Spacesuits are obviously sort of one of the more complicated materials that we decide to put on the lunar surface. So how do we, what are the best ways to do dust mitigation, or understand what those issues are going to be better? So we had, and unfortunately, as Kristen said, there's not a lot of actual data from a lot of the Apollo spacesuit dust interaction things. Most of it is from the crew logs, from just observations, side-hand comments, things like that. Some of it wasn't, there wasn't a lot of quantitative analysis. So hopefully in future missions, we can bring samples back. We can do more long-term observations that can answer a lot of these questions. So I think that part of the solution is more long-term analysis and repeated analysis with these early missions to the lunar surface.
Yeah, I think there's probably definitely some crossover between the two breakout groups, as is going to happen with a topic like this. But yeah, we had a lot of discussion around, surprisingly, around fairy castle structures and the need to measure those or the need to not measure those, but kind of why that's important and implications that, these kinds of measurements have for things like, space weathering and surface property and optical properties. And a lot of discussion kind of from there stemming to discussions on, well, how do we take pristine samples? I think for a while we were talking about how the Apollo astronauts snuck up on rocks to get some samples. We had some discussions on, trenching versus coring and like how deep we should go. You obviously have some great notes in front of you, and I relied on my note taker, so I didn't write anything down. But so I'm trying to remember some of the other topics that we covered at the beginning. That was kind of maybe the last half of the breakout session. Again, a lot on these kind of micro scale structures, as well as what's going to be different in the polar regions, and how do we account for that, in terms of sampling and trafficability and things. So again, a lot of other things were kind of discussed that will be captured for our report. But I think kind of one of the big things that's come up from the day is just, how are the polar regions going to be different from, the equatorial regions or the other areas that we've landed in before, and how do we account for that as we plan for these missions.
Yeah, as a scientist, I'm always like, these are great questions and great science questions. But that's not as satisfying, maybe, if you want actual answers. Cool. Okay, so I think we made it.
Yeah, that's it. I think, Kelsey, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know the other sessions, there's like a website where I think a draft of the report or something is on to comment on. So I think there's gonna be something similar for this as well, correct?
Yes, thank you. Good reminder. Yeah, so Survey has kindly put together a website for us that has the recordings from the previous sessions, as well as in the future we'll have the recordings from today. And on that website are also where we're putting the draft reports that are being generated from each of these sessions. So when Addie and Ryan throw together the report from today, in a few weeks, the draft will be available online, and we'll open that up for community comment and feedback before kind of finalizing the final iteration of that. So thanks for the reminder. And yeah, again, it's a Survey hosted website, and I can drop the URL in the chat if you don't have it.
Just did that as you were speaking.
Oh, great.
And definitely go and look at the previous reports, and feel free to start great conversations in there as well. Some of the previous sessions obviously tied into dust and mitigation. And I think as Ryan and I sort of pointed out, it was hard to sort of decide what the two breakout sessions would be. A lot of these topics are very intertwined. And so there's a lot of this crossover between learning about the science and then applying that to exploration. But using exploration to do better science as well. So I think dust is not just a problem, it's also a really interesting scientific exploration. It's really interesting for science exploration. It's not just a problem. Okay. So with that, shall we wrap it?
Yep. Well, thanks everyone.
Yeah, thanks to all the questions in the chat. And thanks to my co-host and our note takers, I think.
Yep.
We're still on. All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Have a good evening.